Turn it up.
You're listening to I Communicate on Full Service Radio 830 WCRN. Once again, here's your host, Mark Altman.
Welcome back to the Mindset Go radio show. Just want to remind our listeners that please come to the mindsetgo.com website. We are going to be launching a new website. Hopefully, we will have launched it by the time you hear the show. And ultimately, we have webinars, seminars, public speaking engagements. We do private trainings for companies all the time. And you can see our event calendar list. You can sign up for our newsletter so you can keep up to date on events going on with the company. We often send out tips on leadership, sales, communication, emotional intelligence, change management, things like that. Certainly follow us on social media. We're very active on LinkedIn. So I'm glad to have you with us on the show, and love to hear from you and any feedback, and please feel comfortable reaching out to us. Okay, so we're at the third component of Sales EQ. We're talking about self-management. And look, I had a guy say to me in a training a couple of months ago, we were talking about some conversational intelligence templates on how to deal with his coworkers on his team. And he looked at me and he raised his hand in a very frustrated message. He said, so let me get this straight. I need to tiptoe around everybody so I make sure I say the right thing and do the right thing. And that was his reaction. And that in itself, in a nutshell, is what the problem is. When leadership views emotional intelligence, it feels daunting. It feels like I got to do extra work to be careful of what I say or how I act and how I do things. But that's what you should be doing anyway. You know, if you care about your team, if you care about the company you work for, if you care about everybody around you being successful, that shouldn't feel like a burden. It should feel like, great, that's what's going to create the best culture and the most engagement here at my company. So it is daunting, and it can be exhausting. And what's really tough is in a highly pressurized environment, you're not going to be able to succeed at it 100% of the time, but that doesn't mean you failed. And one of the things I talk about in regards to self-management and self-assessment is how do you assess yourself? What are your own standards of performance? So for instance, if you have 10 appointments in the next 2 weeks and you're able to manage your emotions effectively in 8 of the 10, are you happy? Do you feel like that's pretty good? Or do you feel like, damn, I still suck because I didn't do it on 2 of them? And that inner voice of how we manage ourselves and our standards and expectations and confidence is huge. Because in that moment, the way I look at it is the number 8's meaningful if the 2 weeks before it, you'd only did 5. If the 2 weeks before you did 10 and now you're down to 8, that's a concern. But by managing your success rates, not just deals you close, not just how many things are in your pipeline, how many opportunities are in your pipeline, but it's your inner success. And I think if you're guessing and you're not really keeping track and you don't have a process for self-management, that is really a kryptonite to your resiliency and competency. So look, here are the aspects of self-management. I'm going to give you them at a high level and then I'll quickly go through them. One is self-doubt. One is self-blame. One is irrationality. One is overconfident. And one is fear. Okay? So when it comes to self-doubt, that was I was just speaking of. Look, the one thing I take a lot of pride in is I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not yet good at. Now, whether I aspire to become good in the areas I need to improve, that remains to be seen. Maybe I will in some, maybe I won't in others. But self-doubt is really painful. We are so influenced by the people around us, the feedback we get, the reactions we get. Now we add self-doubt into the mix of what we think of ourselves. So if you lack the self-doubt, if you have the self-doubt, and you're not confident, then you probably don't have a process. You probably don't have a template that you can review to know how to properly assess your success. Self-blame. That goes back to what I said earlier in the show today. You know, when I talk about understanding why deals fall through and understanding why you close deals, if every time a deal falls through or every time someone doesn't respond to your email or doesn't return a call and your response is, geez, I guess I'm not really good at it, the truth is you might not be. Really. I mean, you might not be very good at it. But it also might be that you're wrongly blaming you. And it could be you're not good at everything involved in being successful, but there are certain components in self-awareness that you haven't identified yet that would reduce or minimize or eliminate these situations. So what are the things you need to do to erase the question altogether? Is it my fault or their fault? Or if you're going to ask the question, at least be able to have a template to know how to properly answer it. Irrationality. Well, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Irrationality and fear. It's getting outside your comfort zone and doing emotionally intelligent behaviors. More importantly, learning and developing. I hear a lot of companies, they'll say, well, this person doesn't know how to do this. And I say, well, how would they know? If they've never had any internal training, past training, or outside training, how would someone know? I mean, we see people put in leadership positions all the time because they've done good work at the company, but they have no idea how to be a leader. Just because you're good in certain areas doesn't mean you're going to be a great leader. And then how do companies deal with that? Maybe they have someone internally in HR train them, and the HR might not know how to be a good leader in that department. Maybe they go to a boot camp or a one-day or a half-day workshop. That's it. I'm going to become a leader in 1 day and a half day with no sustained and continuous learning. It doesn't make any sense. So you've got to have the knowledge. You've got to have the skills. And if you don't have the experience, either way, you need the tools. But that's part of self-management and self-awareness. Now, the overconfidence, the final factor of self-management, the only comment I'm going to make about overconfidence is most people that are overconfident are hiding the fact that they're really not all that confident at all. So if you're overconfident because you've hit your quota or exceeded your quota, or you're in the President's Club or something along those lines, then great. You've got the track record and ongoing success, and you have every reason to be overconfident. But the problem with sales, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is there's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of slumps you have to battle through. So the people who put on that facade of overconfidence, when they go through those slumps and when they start to get rejected and experience periods of not being successful, you won't necessarily know that their confidence is affected because they're too busy putting on that facade so people can't show there's a chink in the armor or there's potential weaknesses or unsureties or fears. So that's where the overconfidence can come into play. So think about it this way. As you explore the different positive outcomes that go to these three phases of emotional intelligence sales, which is managing client relationships, self-awareness, and self-management, think about this. The ability to handle rejections, difficult questions, and a lack of concentration are just some of the consequences everybody deals with, salespeople for sure, but that means if you have trouble in any or all of those areas, you have low social or low emotional intelligence. If you find yourself getting rejected repeatedly, it can completely erode your drive and any incentive to succeed, no matter how appealing your goals and incentives are, and no matter how confident and skilled you are. If the results aren't there, it greatly impacts your confidence. Okay? So look around at your company and ask yourself, whether it's your sales team or anybody else, how many of the staff here are taking actual steps to see where the process is broken? How many people here are exploring what's not working and what is working and actually are talking it over and have an action plan on how to get coaching or training for it? Empathy is another great example. Utilizing empathy and making it effortless. So when you sit across the table and you understand what a person's pains are and why they would use your services, go deeper. Think about experiences they've had with past vendors and why they might be nervous or fearful or lacking confidence in dealing with you. It could have nothing to do with your products and services. It could be that it's going to be more work for them. So they're like, they know it's a good solution, but it's going to create more work. It could be they have bad relationships or bad experiences with past vendors. It could be that they're afraid of sticking their neck out and making the wrong decision and advocating to the leadership team. It could be all three of those. You've got to be empathetic to that. I said at the top of the show how the second you begin an interaction, that perception piece, how do you change people's perception of you, your company, and your industry? Same thing. How do you use empathy as a tool to really understand the root cause of what their fears are beyond the things related to the product and service itself? So when we come back for our final segment, we're going to continue to explore these components of what makes an emotionally intelligent leader and salesperson. This has been the Mindset Go radio show. I'm your host, Mark Altman. We'll be back after the break.